Welcome to Career Tools. This week, answering why do you want this job when you're overqualified, part 1. The questions this cast answers are, how do I answer why do you want this job when I'm overqualified? How should I explain a step back? And what should I do when I have to take a job I'm overqualified for?
With 3 conference types and 2 different platforms, we've got an offering for everyone. If you can't travel, prefer to learn in person, have an upcoming role to fill on your team, maybe you just got promoted or you're struggling working with a peer. Truly, any situation you're struggling with at work can be helped by one of our 3 conference events when taken virtually or in person. Check us out at manager-tools.com/training for the full calendar of in-person and virtual events. We're looking forward to the opportunity to serve you in one of those locations.
People find themselves interviewing for jobs when they're overqualified for all sorts of reasons. Of course, layoffs is one, and we're recording this in the August 2020, and layoffs and consequences of the virus are everywhere. And there is a lot of people looking for a job that will just pay them a wage and have food on their table right now. But sometimes it's about family or health or location or some other reason that people decide that they want to take a step back. I have a friend who had a friend who got a job as a manager, decided after 6 months he was A, useless at it, and B, hated it, and decided to go back to being an individual contributor. And about 3-4 years later, then became a manager again and was much better prepared and much better suited to it. He really kind of got his head around what he would need to do as a manager. And so there's another good reason for stepping back, for realizing that the job that you went to, that step up, wasn't the right time, wasn't the right job. You weren't ready for it, even if you convinced someone you were. That's another good reason for stepping back. And interviews are often quite blunt, and they just say, why do you want this job when you're overqualified for it? Like, you're clearly smarter than this job, right? You clearly have better experience. You clearly have been a manager before, and now this is only an individual contributor role. Like, why do you want this job? And this cast is about preparing an answer for that, as well as thinking through, an explanation that will make sense and be persuasive.
Mm-hmm. We're going to discuss not assuming that you're viewed as overqualified, always a good thing. Not saying, I need a job. There's 4 parts to the answer. First, acknowledge the obvious. Second, explain why you want the job. Third, emphasize the positive. And fourth, end on a positive note. And then we're also going to cover how to close.
So the first part of this is, don't assume that you're overqualified or that you're viewed as overqualified. If the interviewer doesn't ask the question, then you can assume 2 things. Either they don't care, so they know you're overqualified and they don't think that that's going to be a problem, which we'll talk about in a bit, or they just haven't noticed. Like it didn't even occur to them that you were overqualified for the job. And you don't want to make a big deal of something if the hiring manager doesn't even care or notice. There's no point in wasting 3 or 4 minutes of your interview on something that isn't persuasive to the hiring manager. And if they don't see you as overqualified, then explaining why you are and why you're still a fit for the job is not persuasive. It's just a waste of energy.
Right. Don't bring up something that you think is happening that maybe they're not even paying attention to. Maybe to them, that's not even an issue. It might not be a concern for them.
Exactly. It's like saying, you go into a house and the real estate agent saying, yeah, the driveway is really steep and people have a problem with that. And you're looking at it and you're like, I know you're from San Francisco and it's in San Antonio and to you it's flat. That bringing up a negative when the other person hasn't is just silly.
If someone says something like that, then you start to look for that to be true. It totally reinforces your confirmation bias that, oh, this thing is true. So if you don't bring it up, there's a chance that the hiring manager doesn't believe it to be true. And then if you were to bring it up, now they'll start looking for reasons and they'll find them because that's how confirmation bias works. So,
right, exactly.
If you think that someone could think of you as overqualified, you do need to prepare an answer. And being prepared with this answer is different than going into the interview and mentioning something that maybe they don't think is accurate.
Yeah, exactly. And so let's define overqualified a little bit. So when we're talking about being overqualified, we're talking about situations where you're taking a step back, so a step down the organizational hierarchy, as it were. Or sometimes it's sideways. So you might be going from a role to another sort of equivalent role, but maybe in a department that's less prestigious. Or sometimes just a sideways move in general is seen as, why would you not want to be going up? Or sometimes it's a job that's not obvious, which we'll describe in a second. And it could be a consequence of a layoff or your family needing funds immediately. And not obvious means it's not part of the normal trajectory of people in careers like yours.
And also career paths are very fluid, much more fluid than they have been in the past, and especially this year. I mean, wow. So, for example, entry-level engineers usually start with hands-on engineering jobs. They actually work with the product, or at least the calculations for the product, or they stick them in a room with an Excel file and tell them to leave everyone alone.
That was your experience, huh?
Yeah. The next step after that would be a more complex engineering challenge or managing engineers. It would not be obvious, for example, for an engineer who has been working with complex problems or managing engineers to move to a role more like an entry-level engineering role or even out of engineering altogether. However, if you've just been laid off, you'll realize quickly that there are fewer engineering manager roles than there are individual contributor roles or kind of those what are perceived as entry-level engineering roles. And if we assume, the average team size of 6, then there are 6 times as many individual contributor roles as engineering roles. By the numbers, it should be easier to get one of those individual contributor roles than a managerial one. And of course, that math makes sense. It might not be something you're thinking about in your search, but many people who find themselves in this situation imagine that the hiring manager will be concerned about hiring someone who worked at his level or has managed complex problems. They're thinking, this person has already done, the things that are required to get to my level. And that may be the case. And we're also going to tell you how to deal with that. It may not be the case, though. It could be different at their company. Their company could be bigger or smaller. It could be matrix when yours wasn't. It could be not matrix when yours was. There's a bunch of different things. And if you've ever worked, in, for example, engineering at 2 different firms, even though it's kind of assumed that things will be the same, across the street, it's really not the case. And if you're wrong and the hiring manager doesn't care, then you could be wasting precious interviewing time and minutes and also your energy, your personal energy about it. And I don't know about y'all, but I can get pretty spun up about something that I believe to be a problem. I make myself feel anxious. I imagine a thing and then I tell myself that thing is true and that I get all spun up about it. It's super fun, by the way. And look, half of the hiring managers will be smart enough to realize that you are overqualified and that they're getting increased skills and experience on their team for an individual contributor salary. A smart manager may well see your qualifications as a potential asset to the team. To be frank with you, a really well-qualified engineer in an individual contributor role, if that's something they're comfortable with and something that they are applying for, can be a huge asset to the team. I've worked on teams before where we had people whose, education and background were very, very niche and incredibly complex, and they were incredibly smart people who could have been in a managerial role or in the next step, and they loved what we were doing. And so we use their expertise all the time. I mean, I would go to them and ask questions, and a hiring manager may well know that. They may say, oh my gosh, I'm getting 7 chicken nuggets for the price of 5.
Right, exactly. I interviewed with a hiring manager we were making boats. I can't remember who I was working for, but they made boats. Like high end, for managers of football clubs and things. Mm-hmm. And they had an engineer who had a PhD, but was working in an individual contributor engineering level. And as we were interviewing, he wasn't dismissing overqualified or, candidates. And I thought, well, that's odd because, 50% of hiring managers do. And I asked him about it and he said, no, we have this guy who works in an individual contributor role. He's a genius, but he doesn't want to do anything else. And he saves us so much money because his solutions are so much better than anyone else. We pay him like twice as much as we pay everybody else. He gets to do what he loves and we get way more benefit. And, the guy never wanted to be a manager. He just wanted to play with the things in boats. And this hiring manager I was working with really recognized the benefit of that. So if you're thinking, I'm overqualified, they're going to point it out. It's going to be a concern. And, I have a negative mark in the candidate column. Don't think of it that way. You can actually bring way more than someone who is qualified or, on the qualified level. And if you think of yourself that way, you'll be a better candidate, you'll be a better hire, and you're much more likely to get the job.
Yeah. And engineering's a kind of a good example for this because so many people who like engineering roles are also not interested in the management piece. And so that's a perfect avenue. So if you're an engineer, don't assume that this is going to be something that holds you back or that some hiring manager is not going to be invested in because actually in engineering, it's pretty normal. I didn't know you worked on boats though. That's pretty exciting. We should have talked about that someday.
Yeah, it was pretty cool for a while. I worked in recruitment on an awful lot of things. So I've done a bit of everything and I can, yeah. I interviewed a guy once who did repairs on those more moving walkways you find in airports. It's fascinating. They are so interesting. Anyway.
I love it.
Not surprising, much, if not 95% of our client work prior to March was all on site, where teams were amassed and learning together in one geographical location. What we're learning is that virtual training serves a far broader audience, as many of our clients can now include those who may sit around the globe and never have the opportunity to travel to a location where headquarters resides. Our guidance can still be learned together, only virtually, and at a time zone that can accommodate overseas constituency. We want to serve you so you can lead, no matter where you are. Contact Maggie at manager-tools.com to find out more about our Effective Manager, Effective Communicator, or Effective Hiring Manager client training opportunities. Our price points are affordable and come with supplementary benefits. Mail Maggie today.
So the next thing we want to tell you is don't say, I need a job, because we're not saying don't be truthful here, right? We're not saying don't say, I've been made redundant, I've been laid off, my company went under, whatever. Or even I was fired or I had to leave for health reasons or whatever. Whatever the truth is, you're going to have to say it. But don't say, I need a job, because it sounds like I need a girlfriend. It's just,
Oh my gosh.
It's just desperate, right? And nobody loves desperate.
Wendy and I both live in kind of a 100-mile radius of each other. So have you seen on the news this billboard? This Date Leon billboard? Okay. It's pretty funny. There's a billboard by my house for a guy who's looking for a girlfriend. And it says Date Leon on it. It's like a hashtag and it's trending. Like it's right by my house. That's how I found out about it. But I searched for it because I thought, this couldn't possibly be what I think that it is. And of course, it absolutely is what I think that it is. And it is very much, I need a girlfriend.
And I have this horrible feeling it's not working for him.
Yeah, it's not. It's not.
So let's not think about I need a job or I need a girlfriend. Let's think about the positive aspects of the job, the positive aspects of your experience and what you can bring to that job rather than the negative aspects.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. Saying a job is kind of like putting up a billboard for the entire city to see, and it smacks of desperation. And no matter what we do, desperation is never very attractive. Let's not let shame and fear do our thinking and speaking for us. This is kind of like our first point, right? Let's not let our fear and concerns cause us to be a less than stellar interview. Let's not let us get wrapped around that axle. Your layoff or even your firing is behind you. You can do nothing about the past. You have skills and experience that you've been hired for before. And those are all positive things. And we've talked about this before. Most people I know have been either laid off or fired at one point in their lives. It would be great if we could all say about every job, honestly, truthfully, I've never worried about position or salary. I've always done my best to focus on results for my organization and develop relationships with people I work with. Right now I'm in a bad situation, but things will be okay. If you can't say that truthfully now, that's okay. And especially y'all right now, like if you're listening to this when we're close to when we record it, which is August of 2020, it'll soon be September. A lot of people are in this position, and let's start to make that statement true, that I'm in a bad position now, but things will be okay. Let's work towards that, because that's, of course, what we're trying to help you with, is to turn your situation into a more positive one. That's why we're here to support you. That's why we put out these casts, and hopefully this guidance can, assist you in that as well. And that's our goal here. So the next part of our guidance will help prepare you a more positive and comprehensive answer that you can use in these interviews and this situation. It has 3 parts, right?
4 parts.
My file, 4 parts. And I knew that because I am the person who told us what we were going to cover and then just didn't do the math. So both Wendy and I probably could have had more coffee this morning. We've discussed it. I'm still drinking mine. It's a Saturday. So
yeah, please forgive us. Okay. Let's try to do the next part better than we just did that bit. Okay. So the answer has 4 parts. So you're going to create 4-part answer. And then when you deliver it, you're going to deliver it as 1 paragraph. So the part 1 is acknowledging the obvious. So if the interviewer says to you, why do you want this job when you're clearly overqualified? You can't ignore the fact that they think you're overqualified. And actually, while I'm saying this, I'm thinking, actually, there's occasions when the hiring manager will say this and you don't think you're overqualified. And in fact, that probably happens quite a lot of the time because many of us think that we're not up to the job we're applying for. We go for something that's kind of 75% we think we can do. And a lot of the time, hiring managers don't see it that way, in part because they have a much better idea of what the job is than you do, right? All you have is a job description or an advert. Like you maybe have 500 words. They have a year or 2 managing that role. They might have even been in that role. So a lot of the times a hiring manager has a lot better understanding of the job than you do and may think that you're overqualified even when you're not, or even when you don't think you are. So if you're asked that question, the interviewer clearly has concerns about you being overqualified. So don't try and avoid the question. Don't have some clever answer. Like a lot of the times when I see this on the web, the recommendation is come up with this really clever answer, this really witty or an answer that uses words in a kind of weaselly way. Don't do that because interviewers and hiring managers can see straight through it. Instead, acknowledge the issue. So we're just gonna hit this straight on. I'm really excited about this job. I'm not worried about being overqualified. In fact, I see that as an advantage. The problem with being overqualified in my experience is when people act like they're better than the job. And you will never hear anything like that from me. So we're saying, yes, I know why you think I'm overqualified. I'm going to tell you why that's an advantage for you. And I'm not going to be whining about the job. And I'm not going to be trying to get your chair, which is one of those, where do you see yourselves in 5 years? In your chair. No whining. And we're just hitting, in the first part, we're just hitting the question straight on. Yes, I understand why you think that. I don't think it's a negative. And you're not going to hear whining from me.
Good. I love it.
That's the first half of this. We'll be back next week with the second part.